Epicurus was a Greek philosopher born on the island of Samos around 341 BCE. He came from a well-off family, but chose a life that was very different from the typical path people of his time followed. Instead of pursuing wealth or fame, he set out to explore the deeper questions of life. What truly makes people happy, and how can they live a life of peace? He believed that most people spend their lives chasing things that promise happiness, but end up leading them to more pain. His ideas were radical, especially for his time. While many of his contemporaries were focused on things like power, honor, or material wealth, Epicurus believed that happiness wasn't found in the pursuit of these things, but in something much simpler. He founded his own school of thought known as Epicureanism. His followers lived together in a community called the Garden, which was a place where they could discuss philosophy, enjoy simple pleasures, and find peace. Epicurus didn't believe in living a life of luxury or indulgence. In fact, he argued that the best way to live was by focusing on modest pleasures, rather than chasing after excess. For Epicurus, happiness didn't come from external things like wealth, power, or social status. Instead, it came from within. It came from living a life of moderation, wisdom, and self-control. One of the key principles of his philosophy was that pleasure is the highest good. But not just any kind of pleasure. He wasn't talking about fleeting, immediate satisfaction like indulgence in food or material things. Epicurus believed that true pleasure was the absence of pain, both physical and mental. The idea was simple: if you can avoid pain and discomfort, you can find a lasting sense of contentment. To him, pleasure wasn't about maximizing sensory enjoyment or hedonistic experiences. It was about finding inner tranquility and satisfaction in simple things. This might sound strange to us today, where we often equate happiness with excitement or indulgence. But for Epicurus, true happiness was found in peace of mind, in the absence of fear, and in enjoying the simple pleasures of life. Epicurus didn't just tell people to seek pleasure and avoid pain. He also emphasized the importance of knowledge and wisdom in achieving happiness. He believed that by understanding the world around us, we could avoid unnecessary pain and suffering. For example, he argued that people often live in fear because they don't understand death. They fear it because they don't know that death is simply the end of sensation. Once someone dies, they no longer experience pain or pleasure, so there's nothing to fear. By understanding this, Epicurus believed that people could live without the constant worry of death, which was a major source of anxiety in his time. He also taught that friendships were one of the most important aspects of life. Epicurus believed that genuine, meaningful relationships were a source of deep pleasure and joy. He didn't mean superficial friendships or relationships based on selfish motives. Instead, he believed that true friendship based on mutual respect, trust, and shared values was one of the most fulfilling parts of life. People who share a common goal of living a simple, meaningful life could provide each other with support and companionship. Epicurus even said that it was better to live a modest life with good friends than to live a life of luxury with no true companionship. Epicurus's philosophy was about understanding the world as it truly is. He argued that many people were misled by illusions or misconceptions, particularly about things like gods and the afterlife. In his view, people often lived in fear of gods who supposedly punished them for their actions. Epicurus rejected this idea and said that the gods were not concerned with human affairs. According to him, the gods were simply beings who lived in a state of perfect happiness and didn't interfere with human lives. This was a freeing thought for many people, as it helped them let go of their anxieties about divine punishment and focus on living their own lives. Epicurus's philosophy wasn't about avoiding all pleasures. He didn't advocate for a life of total asceticism or self-denial. Rather, it was about finding the right balance. He taught that some pleasures were worth pursuing, but only those that would not lead to pain in the future. For example, eating a meal that satisfies your hunger can be a pleasure, but overeating would eventually lead to discomfort and harm your health. Similarly, spending time with friends can bring joy, but becoming overly attached or dependent on others can cause distress. Epicurus believed in the importance of self-control and moderation, ensuring that the pleasures we pursue don't ultimately harm us. Despite his teachings, Epicurus's ideas weren't always popular. In fact, many people misunderstood him. Some thought he was simply encouraging people to indulge in their desires without restraint. This couldn't have been further from the truth. His philosophy was about finding freedom from the pain caused by excess, whether it was the excess of food, wealth, power, or even pleasure itself. He believed that most people were enslaved by their desires, and that true freedom came from understanding what was truly important and focusing on that. Epicurus's ideas were also influential in shaping the way people thought about the nature of happiness and how to live a good life. While his philosophy was often overshadowed by other schools of thought, especially in the centuries after his death, it began to see a revival in the modern world. Today, many of his ideas resonate with those who seek a simpler, more meaningful life. People who are tired of the constant chase for material possessions and the pursuit of superficial goals often turn to Epicurus's teachings as a way to find peace and contentment in a world that often feels overwhelming and chaotic. Epicurus wasn't just a philosopher. He was a teacher and a guide who offered practical advice for living a better life. His school, the Garden, was a place where people could find not just intellectual insight, but also a sense of community and belonging. Epicurus believed that a fulfilling life was one of balance, wisdom, and understanding. He didn't offer easy answers or empty promises of instant gratification, but rather a pathway to a deeper, more lasting sense of peace. By focusing on simple pleasures, cultivating meaningful relationships, and understanding the nature of the world around us, Epicurus believed that anyone could achieve true happiness. His philosophy continues to offer valuable insights for anyone seeking to live a life that is both meaningful and content. Epicurus's ideas didn't exist in a vacuum. He was a product of the philosophical traditions that came before him, and his views were shaped by what other thinkers were saying at the time. Two of the most prominent schools of thought during his life were Stoicism and Cynicism. Though these schools had their own distinct approaches to life, all three had a shared interest in understanding what makes life worth living. But when it came to happiness, Epicurus's ideas set him apart in some interesting ways. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, focused on cultivating virtue through wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. Stoics believed that the key to happiness was accepting the natural order of the world and responding to events with inner calm. According to the Stoics, external circumstances, whether good or bad, were irrelevant to one's peace of mind. What mattered most was how a person reacted to those circumstances. They argued that pleasure and pain were beyond a person's control, and therefore should not be the basis for our happiness. Instead, virtue, acting in accordance with reason, was the true source of joy. For the Stoics, happiness came not from the pursuit of pleasure, but from accepting whatever happened and focusing on self-mastery. Epicurus, however, took a different approach. While he agreed with the Stoics that wisdom and self-control were essential, he didn't believe that pleasure was something to be ignored or denied. For him, pleasure wasn't an enemy to be resisted. Instead, he argued that the goal of life was to seek pleasure, not in a hedonistic, indulgent way, but in a balanced, thoughtful manner. Epicurus believed that by understanding the world and controlling desires, one could achieve a state of peace. His version of happiness wasn't about suppressing emotions or desires. It was about seeking a life of simple pleasures, things like good food, close friendships, and a peaceful mind. The Stoics saw external things as distractions from true happiness. In their view, wealth, fame, or pleasure had little value if they didn't align with virtue. Epicurus, on the other hand, argued that pleasure, when approached in the right way, was central to living a good life. He didn't view the pursuit of pleasure as something selfish or shallow. Rather, he saw it as the natural aim of human life. The difference between Epicurus and the Stoics was not so much in their desire for peace, but in their approach to how one should achieve that peace. Cynicism, another popular philosophical school in ancient Greece, also had its own take on happiness. Founded by Diogenes of Sinope, the Cynics were known for their rejection of social conventions and materialism. They believed that people could only find true freedom and happiness by living in accordance with nature, free from the constraints of society. For the Cynics, happiness came from living a life of self-sufficiency, avoiding unnecessary luxuries, and embracing simplicity. They were not interested in pleasure for pleasure's sake, but rather in being free from dependence on external things. To them, happiness was about living authentically, without being burdened by societal expectations or material desires. Epicurus shared some similarities with the Cynics. Both schools of thought valued simplicity and independence. However, there was a key difference in how they saw pleasure. While the Cynics rejected pleasure as something that distracted from true freedom, Epicurus saw it as a natural part of life, something that could be cultivated in a balanced way. For him, the pursuit of pleasure wasn't about indulgence. It was about understanding what was truly necessary for a peaceful, fulfilling life. Epicurus believed that people could enjoy simple pleasures, like a meal with friends or a walk in nature, without being enslaved by desire. The Cynics, on the other hand, were more radical in their rejection of pleasures, seeing them as distractions from the pursuit of virtue and freedom. When compared to modern hedonism, Epicurus's views also stand out. Today, the word hedonism often conjures up images of excessive indulgence, of people living for pleasure without concern for consequences. Modern hedonism tends to emphasize instant gratification, whether it's through eating junk food, drinking, or other forms of indulgence. People chase pleasure without thinking about the long-term effects it might have on their health, relationships, or mental well-being. Epicurus would have rejected this approach. His philosophy wasn't about indulgence. It wasn't about chasing every pleasure that came your way. Instead, it was about understanding what pleasures were truly worth pursuing and avoiding those that would lead to harm or discomfort in the future. Epicurus believed that many of the pleasures people sought, like wealth, power, or fame, weren't necessary for happiness. In fact, they often led to more pain than pleasure. He argued that people should seek simple, modest pleasures that contribute to a calm and peaceful life. This might mean enjoying a quiet evening with friends, sharing a meal, or finding satisfaction in a job well done. But it didn't mean constantly chasing new experiences or overindulging in things that would leave you feeling empty later. In his view, happiness wasn't found in sensory overload or material wealth. It wasn't about constantly seeking out the next thrill or indulgence. True happiness for Epicurus came from a deep understanding of what was necessary for a peaceful life, and from cultivating simple, sustainable pleasures. While modern hedonism often encourages people to satisfy their desires without thinking about the consequences, Epicurus believed that real pleasure came from knowing what to avoid. He understood that certain pleasures, like overeating, excessive drinking, or chasing after status, might bring temporary satisfaction, but they would eventually lead to dissatisfaction and pain. The core of Epicurus's philosophy was that happiness doesn't come from the pursuit of pleasure at any cost. It comes from the pursuit of the right kind of pleasure, pleasures that contribute to inner peace and well-being. He understood that the path to happiness required wisdom, self-control, and moderation. This was a stark contrast to the more reckless, pleasure-seeking attitudes often associated with modern life, where modern hedonism might tell you to grab every pleasure you can find. Epicurus told you to seek the ones that would lead to lasting peace and to avoid the ones that would leave you feeling empty. Epicurus's ideas about happiness were deeply thoughtful and practical. He wasn't interested in pursuing pleasure at all costs, nor was he focused on denying it altogether. He understood that happiness came from understanding what you truly needed to feel content, and from avoiding the distractions and illusions that might lead you astray. His approach to happiness was a balanced one, focused on living a life of simplicity, moderation, and wisdom, a sharp contrast to both the Stoic idea of enduring discomfort for the sake of virtue and the modern idea of indulging in whatever gives you immediate pleasure. Epicurus's concept of pleasure might sound different from what we usually think of today. In modern times, pleasure often means indulgence, going after things like food, drink, sex, or entertainment, whatever gives instant satisfaction. But for Epicurus, true pleasure wasn't about chasing after those fleeting experiences. Instead, he defined pleasure as the absence of pain, both physical and mental. It was more about creating a life where you don't need to constantly fight off discomfort or distress. In other words, pleasure is the calmness that comes from being free of pain, anxiety, or unfulfilled desires. This idea of pleasure wasn't just about avoiding suffering. It was about building a state of mind where you don't need to constantly crave or chase things to feel satisfied. Epicurus coined the term ataraxia, which means peace of mind or mental tranquility. For him, a life of true pleasure was a life free from the mental chaos that comes from constant worry, fear, or desire. It wasn't about the highs of pleasure or the excitement of new experiences. Instead, it was about learning to live in such a way that you're not bothered by what you don't have or what you fear you might lose. Epicurus didn't deny that physical pleasures existed. He understood that eating good food or resting in a comfortable environment could bring a sense of happiness. But he argued that these pleasures were not the ultimate goal of life. In fact, they were only valuable if they didn't lead to pain later on. If you overindulged, ate too much, or sought excessive pleasures, the result was often discomfort or harm. This was where Epicurus's thinking differed from modern hedonism. Instead of constantly seeking new sensory pleasures, Epicurus believed the key to happiness was moderation. It wasn't about denying pleasure, but making sure that the pleasures you pursued were balanced and didn't create future discomfort. For Epicurus, the greatest form of pleasure was mental peace, the freedom from anxiety, fear, and unnecessary desire. He believed that most of our suffering came from these things: our worries about the future, our fear of death, our envy of others. If you could learn to manage those mental distractions, you could find true happiness. So, Epicurus didn't see pleasure as something that could be bought or achieved through indulgence. Instead, pleasure was something you could create by understanding your needs and desires, by making wise choices about what to focus on, and by learning to avoid the things that caused unnecessary pain. Take fear, for example. A lot of people are afraid of death. It's a common human fear, and it can cause a lot of anxiety. Epicurus taught that this fear was one of the biggest sources of pain in life. He argued that death itself wasn't something to fear. When you die, he said, you simply stop experiencing anything at all. There's no pain, no fear, no sensation. Since death is the end of experience, there's nothing for you to worry about. This was a radical idea at the time because many people believed in gods who would punish them after death, or an afterlife full of judgment and suffering. Epicurus's approach to death was liberating. If you didn't fear it, then you didn't need to live your life in constant anxiety about it. In this way, by eliminating the fear of death, you could free yourself from one of the most powerful sources of mental pain. Another key element in Epicurus's view of pleasure was the importance of self-control. He wasn't advocating for living a life of deprivation or self-denial. Instead, he suggested that we should focus on the pleasures that contribute to our well-being and avoid the ones that lead to suffering. Epicurus understood that human beings have natural desires. We need food to survive, companionship for happiness, and a sense of security for peace of mind. But he also recognized that not all desires were necessary, and some could lead to more harm than good. The desire for excessive wealth, for fame, or for constant excitement, for example, could create stress and dissatisfaction. When people focused too much on these desires, they often found themselves trapped in a cycle of craving that never truly satisfied them. Epicurus believed that simple pleasures were often the most fulfilling. A warm meal with friends, a quiet day in nature, the satisfaction of intellectual conversation. These were the kinds of pleasures that brought lasting happiness. The key was understanding which pleasures were necessary and which ones were superfluous. He didn't advocate for giving up all pleasures, but he did warn against letting pleasure dominate your life or become the measure of your worth. In this way, Epicurus's version of pleasure was about balance. You sought what was good for you, and you enjoyed it in moderation, without letting it take over your life or lead you into excess. Another revolutionary part of Epicurus's philosophy was his approach to pleasure in relation to society. In his view, people often pursued happiness through the approval of others, chasing status, social recognition, or material wealth. But he argued that these pursuits often led to frustration. When you live your life based on what others think of you, you're not in control of your own happiness. True pleasure, Epicurus believed, came from self-sufficiency, from relying on your own understanding of what makes life worth living, not from external validation. This was a sharp contrast to the way many people today still live, seeking constant approval through social media or the pursuit of status symbols. One of the most important aspects of Epicurus's philosophy was his emphasis on friendship. Unlike many philosophies that focus on individual achievement or self-sufficiency, Epicurus recognized that happiness is often best found in the relationships we build with others. He argued that friends are one of the most valuable sources of pleasure. A strong, supportive friendship could help alleviate mental suffering, provide comfort in difficult times, and offer joy in everyday moments. Epicurus's view of friendship was simple. It wasn't about using people to fulfill your desires. but about building genuine, meaningful connections that brought peace and happiness into your life. Epicurus's idea of true pleasure also differed from the idea of pleasure as a continuous quest for more. He understood that life was finite, and that happiness didn't come from trying to accumulate experiences or possessions. Instead, it came from focusing on the pleasures that mattered most and enjoying them without constantly seeking the next thing. The mind, for Epicurus, was just as important as the body in the pursuit of happiness. By cultivating mental peace, eliminating unnecessary fears, and focusing on the pleasures that truly contribute to well-being, people could achieve lasting contentment. In a world full of distractions and excess, Epicurus's teachings remind us that true pleasure often lies in simplicity. By understanding our desires, controlling our impulses, and embracing peace of mind, we can live a life that is both fulfilling and free from unnecessary pain. Pleasure, in Epicurus's view, wasn't about constant indulgence. It was about knowing what to avoid, finding balance, and living in a way that allowed us to enjoy the good things life has to offer, without letting them take over. Epicurus believed that the path to true happiness wasn't about constantly seeking more, but understanding what you already have and making the most of it. His philosophy wasn't about denying yourself pleasure, but about finding a balanced approach to life. Wisdom, in his eyes, was the key to understanding this balance. Wisdom wasn't just about knowing what was right or wrong. It was about understanding what truly mattered in life, recognizing which desires were necessary, and learning to control those that weren't. Wisdom, in Epicurus's view, was the ability to discern what brought lasting happiness and what brought temporary satisfaction that ultimately led to pain or regret. For him, moderation was just as important as wisdom. He wasn't against pleasure. In fact, he thought pleasure was essential to a good life. But he saw pleasure as something to be managed, not something to be chased endlessly. Excess, whether it was overeating, overindulging in drink, or trying to accumulate wealth, was not the route to happiness. In fact, these excesses often led to discomfort, stress, or dissatisfaction. True pleasure, for Epicurus, was found in moderation, in understanding that our needs were simple and that we didn't have to go after every desire that came our way. This view was revolutionary. It went against the grain of many other philosophies of the time, which often placed virtue or self-denial at the center of happiness. Epicurus didn't think happiness was about giving up pleasures or enduring discomfort. He believed happiness was about understanding what was truly necessary for a fulfilling life. With wisdom, people could learn to recognize their natural desires, focus on the pleasures that really contributed to their well-being, and avoid those that would only lead to trouble down the road. Reflection was another vital part of Epicurus's philosophy. Wisdom didn't come from simply learning facts or ideas. It came from thinking about your life, reflecting on your actions, and adjusting your behavior accordingly. Reflection helped you understand your true needs, what made you happy and what caused you stress or pain. By taking the time to reflect on your desires and actions, you could gain greater insight into what led to lasting happiness and what led to suffering. It wasn't enough to follow desires mindlessly. Epicurus thought people needed to stop and think about their choices before pursuing them. But wisdom and moderation weren't just about avoiding excess. They were also about understanding how to use your time and energy. Epicurus didn't believe that happiness came from filling every moment with activity or pleasure. Instead, it came from living thoughtfully, understanding what was important, and spending time with the people and activities that truly brought meaning to your life. For him, true happiness came from having a clear sense of what you valued, what brought you peace, and acting in accordance with that understanding. Wisdom allowed you to cut through the noise of life and focus on what really mattered. Epicurus also understood that relationships played a key role in happiness. He wasn't someone who thought people should go through life alone, seeking pleasure in solitude. Instead, he saw friendship and community as central to a fulfilling life. For him, true pleasure came from relationships, deep, meaningful connections that weren't built on the pursuit of selfish desires, but on shared understanding, trust, and respect. In fact, he believed that the greatest pleasure came from being able to share life with others who valued the same things. This idea of friendship wasn't about superficial connections or using others to get ahead. It was about being surrounded by people who supported you, who helped you grow, and with whom you could share simple pleasures. Whether it was enjoying a meal together, discussing ideas, or just sitting in quiet company, the value of friendship for Epicurus couldn't be overstated. He believed that true happiness came from being part of a community where you could find companionship and where you didn't have to face the struggles of life alone. In fact, Epicurus thought that isolation was one of the biggest threats to happiness. Without friends, without a sense of community, it would be much harder to find lasting peace. Isolation, in his view, often led to anxiety, fear, and a constant craving for more, whether that meant more pleasure, more stuff, or more recognition. True happiness came from knowing that you had people you could count on, people who cared about you for who you were, not for what you could give them. This was a radical departure from the idea that happiness came from individual success or personal achievement. Instead, Epicurus taught that happiness was inherently tied to our relationships with others. The community, for him, wasn't about being part of some large society or trying to meet the expectations of the world. It was about finding a group of people who shared your values, who were also interested in pursuing a peaceful, moderate life. Epicurus didn't think you needed to have hundreds of friends or be constantly surrounded by people. What mattered was having a few trusted companions who could walk with you on the path to true happiness, who could help you reflect, help you stay grounded, and help you find joy in the simple things in life. For Epicurus, the pursuit of true pleasure was never a solo journey. It was always intertwined with others. This view is in stark contrast to today's culture, where people often think they need to achieve happiness alone, whether it's through career success, social media validation, or material possessions. Epicurus would argue that true happiness was about living in harmony with others, not about climbing the social ladder or accumulating things. It was about understanding that the best parts of life often come from the relationships you build, not from what you have or what you achieve on your own. And this understanding of friendship and community wasn't limited to just a few people. Epicurus also believed in a broader sense of human connection, where people should aim to live peacefully with each other. He didn't think the world should be a place of competition or constant struggle. Instead, he imagined a world where people understood their shared humanity, where they sought to support each other rather than tear each other down. The joy of living well, for Epicurus, was deeply connected to the joy of living in harmony with others. The role of wisdom in all this was clear. It wasn't just about knowing facts or figuring out how to get ahead in life. It was about understanding what really brought happiness, about recognizing that true pleasure came not from indulging in excess, but from finding balance and meaning. It was about reflecting on your desires, being honest with yourself about what you really needed, and learning to appreciate the simple things. Epicurus's vision of happiness wasn't about escaping pain or seeking endless excitement. It was about creating a life that was rich with relationships, peace, and a sense of purpose. The balance he advocated for between self-control and the pursuit of genuine joy wasn't just a personal ideal. It was something that applied to how we interacted with the world around us. For Epicurus, wisdom wasn't just a tool for personal satisfaction. It was a way to live a life that was better for everyone. True happiness, in his view, was something that came from living in accordance with both your own needs and the needs of those around you. It was about creating a life that allowed for both individual well-being and a sense of community, where pleasure was found not in isolation, but in connection. In today's world, many of us are surrounded by things that promise instant happiness. They're easily accessible, and they seem to offer something we want in the moment: excitement, comfort, or pleasure. But like many of the pleasures Epicurus warned about, they don't always lead to lasting fulfillment. Take junk food, for example. We all know how satisfying it can be to grab a quick snack, whether it's a greasy burger, chips, or a sugary dessert. In the moment, it's almost too easy to indulge. The taste is rich, the feeling of being full is immediate, and for a short while it seems like the perfect solution to hunger or boredom. But just like many of the pleasures Epicurus warned us against, junk food brings a temporary high with serious long-term consequences. It's easy to forget that those empty calories don't just disappear. Over time, they catch up to you. Instead of providing the sustained energy and nutrition your body needs, they fill you with things that are bad for you, creating physical discomfort, weight gain, and health problems. What started as a quick moment of pleasure soon leads to the opposite of what Epicurus envisioned as a fulfilling life: discomfort and dissatisfaction, Epicurus thought that true pleasure was not about seeking instant gratification that caused long-term harm. He believed that the pursuit of simple pleasures, ones that were in balance with our needs, would lead to happiness without pain. Junk food doesn't fit into that category. The quick rush of satisfaction from eating unhealthy food comes with a heavy price. It's a pattern that mirrors exactly what Epicurus warned about: the cycle of indulgence leading to eventual discomfort. In modern society, it's easy to get caught in the trap of thinking that the next quick fix will bring us happiness. Junk food is everywhere. It's cheap, fast, and so easy to grab when we're hungry or in need of a little pick-me-up. But the momentary pleasure it gives us is fleeting, and soon enough we feel sluggish, bloated, or even sick. In the end, it's not just the body that suffers. The mind can also be affected. Constantly chasing these quick pleasures only creates a feeling of emptiness, something that can't be filled by another sugary snack or salty treat. Epicurus would argue that these are the types of pleasures that bring us pain, not happiness. He wasn't against pleasure itself, but he warned against those pleasures that lead to long-term suffering. If you consistently indulge in junk food, the pleasure you get from it soon becomes a distant memory, and you're left dealing with the consequences: health issues, lack of energy, or even a sense of dissatisfaction because the cravings never really go away. Instead of leading to lasting happiness, the cycle of eating unhealthy food brings frustration and physical discomfort. The reason junk food causes so many problems is that it relies on immediate satisfaction while ignoring the longer-term impact it has on the body. The same could be said for many of the things we turn to for happiness today. Things that promise a quick fix, like social media, gambling, or even entertainment. They give us a temporary thrill, but after that, we're left searching for more, trying to find something that will finally fulfill us. Epicurus believed that the key to true pleasure was to avoid those kinds of distractions, to focus on what truly brings balance and well-being into our lives. Junk food, like many modern indulgences, offers only a shallow sense of satisfaction. It promises happiness but delivers pain instead. It's not hard to see how this pattern plays out in other areas of life as well. Many of us are constantly chasing after things that seem to promise instant gratification. We may dive into the latest trends, seek out the newest gadgets, or find ourselves scrolling endlessly through social media, looking for something that will make us feel better in the moment. But in the end, these pleasures don't lead to anything deeper. They may be satisfying at first, but they're short-lived, and soon enough, we find ourselves wanting more. This brings us back to the concept of balance that Epicurus emphasized. True happiness, according to him, comes from understanding our desires and focusing on what truly brings joy and peace. Junk food, like many of the pleasures we seek today, is a quick fix that leads us further from what we really need: health, well-being, and mental peace. When we indulge in excess, we ignore the wisdom of moderation and miss out on the deeper satisfaction that comes from living in harmony with our needs and desires. Epicurus warned us that true pleasure isn't about chasing endless sensations or filling ourselves with distractions. Instead, it's about living in a way that avoids unnecessary pain and cultivates a sense of inner peace. Junk food is a prime example of a modern pleasure that doesn't align with this ideal. It offers something satisfying for a moment, but leaves us with the aftermath of regret and discomfort. This pattern is something that we can easily recognize in our own lives. How quickly we reach for something that gives us pleasure, only to regret it later when we feel the negative consequences. The problem with junk food isn't just that it's bad for our bodies. It's that it creates a cycle of craving, where we're constantly searching for the next quick fix without ever feeling truly satisfied. This is the type of pleasure that Epicurus warned against. He didn't believe that true happiness came from indulging in anything that might cause us harm, whether that harm was physical, mental, or emotional. The pleasure we get from junk food isn't sustainable. It's a quick burst that fades, leaving us back where we started, craving more. In this sense, junk food is a perfect example of what Epicurus saw as a false form of happiness. It's not the kind of pleasure that leads to a well-lived life. Instead, it's the type of indulgence that leads to long-term problems. The true pleasure Epicurus described wasn't about seeking endless indulgences or feeding our cravings. It was about knowing when to stop, recognizing that pleasure without balance only leads to suffering. In this way, junk food serves as a clear warning, a reminder that happiness isn't found in excess but in simplicity, moderation, and the wisdom to know when enough is enough. The pursuit of true happiness, according to Epicurus, involves understanding our desires and acting wisely. Junk food, much like other modern distractions, often promises satisfaction but delivers something quite different: physical discomfort, mental strain, and a sense of emptiness. This is exactly what Epicurus meant when he said that pleasure without wisdom leads to pain. By turning to things that give us immediate gratification without thinking about the consequences, we ignore the deeper, more lasting pleasures that bring true happiness. Pornography is another example of how the promise of pleasure can quickly turn into emptiness. In the moment, it seems like an easy way to satisfy a desire. It gives instant gratification and can feel exciting or pleasurable, but what happens afterward? That momentary satisfaction fades fast. Like many other forms of instant pleasure, it doesn't provide anything meaningful beyond that brief rush. The feelings of fulfillment or connection don't last. Epicurus would see this as another example of a false pleasure, one that only feeds into temporary satisfaction without providing lasting happiness. He believed that seeking pleasure purely through the senses without any thought for deeper meaning could never lead to true happiness. Sensory pleasures, in his view, often have the opposite effect. They leave us feeling more empty. They don't satisfy the deeper emotional needs we have as human beings. Porn may satisfy a physical desire in the moment, but it doesn't fulfill the emotional and psychological needs that come with true connection, intimacy, and companionship. Over time, this can lead to feelings of isolation or even shame. But the cycle continues because the initial high remains tempting. It's a trap. The more you seek that immediate pleasure, the less satisfying it becomes. Instead of leading to a deeper sense of connection or well-being, it takes you further away from what Epicurus believed was important: living a balanced life, cultivating genuine relationships, and finding pleasure in simple things that bring peace. This kind of quick pleasure doesn't create real satisfaction. It just serves to distract us from the things that would actually fulfill us in a lasting way. The problem with pornography isn't just that it's a shallow form of pleasure. It's that it encourages a way of thinking that focuses on instant gratification without any regard for the long-term consequences. Epicurus would argue that true happiness comes from understanding your needs and making choices that align with those needs, not just giving in to whatever gives you immediate pleasure. When we let our desires control us, like constantly turning to porn for satisfaction, we ignore the wisdom of moderation and balance. The emotional and psychological toll of this kind of gratification builds over time. While it may seem like an easy fix, it creates a deeper longing for something more. The moment the initial pleasure fades, we find ourselves chasing the next hit. But it never fully satisfies, and eventually we begin to feel even more disconnected, more distant from what actually matters. What's missing here isn't the physical pleasure. It's the deeper emotional connection, the sense of intimacy and understanding that Epicurus would say is essential for true happiness. Social media operates in much the same way. On the surface, it seems like a perfect way to connect with others, to share parts of our lives, and to feel included. We post pictures, share thoughts, and interact with others online. In the moment, it feels good to get likes, comments, and attention. It's a quick boost to our self-esteem and sense of belonging. But, as with so many other instant pleasures, that feeling doesn't last long. After a few minutes, hours, or days, we may find ourselves craving more. The likes may not come as quickly next time, or the interaction might feel shallow, and suddenly, that initial sense of connection fades. Instead of creating real, meaningful relationships, social media often leaves people feeling more disconnected. It's not uncommon to scroll through endless feeds and feel more lonely afterward, wondering why others seem so happy, or why their lives appear more exciting. This constant comparison, the measuring of our worth against others' curated online personas, increases feelings of anxiety and inadequacy. Instead of helping us connect, social media often isolates us more, as we get caught up in the illusion of what others' lives look like. Epicurus would argue that social media provides an illusion of connection, a false sense of being part of something greater. But in reality, it often makes us feel more disconnected and less content with our own lives. It's the same problem he identified with sensory pleasures. They provide a brief moment of satisfaction, but don't lead to lasting fulfillment. Social media's constant stream of updates and interactions may give us short bursts of pleasure, but in the long run, it doesn't satisfy our deeper needs for genuine connection or real self-contentment. What makes this even worse is that social media constantly distracts us from what truly matters. Instead of focusing on cultivating deep relationships or taking time to reflect on our lives, we're bombarded with constant updates, notifications, and the pressure to be on all the time. It's easy to get caught up in what others are doing, to chase after the likes or the followers, thinking that these things will bring us happiness or fulfillment. But, as Epicurus would point out, this is a form of external distraction. These things take us away from what's truly important: inner peace, genuine relationships, and contentment with what we have. The deeper issue with social media, like pornography, is that it leads us to avoid confronting our own desires and needs. It distracts us from finding true joy in the present moment and pushes us toward a constant need for external validation. It's a cycle that feeds itself. The more we post, the more we crave attention, and the more we compare ourselves to others. This constant need for external approval only increases feelings of loneliness, as we end up focusing more on how others perceive us than on how we feel about ourselves. Epicurus believed that happiness came from understanding our desires and living in a way that minimized unnecessary distractions. In today's world, social media is one of the biggest distractions. It feeds into our desire for constant validation and comparison. But true happiness, according to Epicurus, doesn't come from the approval of others or the fleeting satisfaction of a like or a comment. It comes from living a life of moderation, from seeking deep connections with people who truly understand and support us, and from turning away from external distractions that only serve to pull us further from inner peace. Just like the quick pleasure of eating junk food or seeking a momentary thrill, social media's false sense of connection can leave us feeling more disconnected than ever. We end up searching for meaning in all the wrong places. Epicurus warned against these distractions, those that promise pleasure but lead only to emptiness. He believed that true happiness lies not in seeking constant validation or in indulging in fleeting pleasures, but in focusing on what truly fulfills us: genuine relationships, peace of mind, and a sense of balance in our lives. We live in a world designed to chase instant rewards. Our brains are wired for it. It's not our fault, really. Humans are naturally inclined to seek out things that feel good right away. The reason behind this is simple. The brain releases dopamine when we get a reward. It's a chemical response that tells us, "That felt good, do it again." It's how we're wired to learn and repeat behaviors that bring us pleasure. This used to be useful in survival situations. For example, when we ate something that gave us energy, our brain's reward system reinforced that behavior, ensuring we would keep eating what nourished us. But in the modern world, our brains are bombarded with rewards that don't always serve our best interests. Today we can get instant satisfaction from almost anything. The problem is, we've turned this natural system into something more than just a survival mechanism. It's become an addiction. Everywhere we look, there's something trying to trigger that dopamine release. Advertisements, social media, fast food, entertainment, gambling, shopping, you name it. These systems have evolved to exploit our natural desire for quick rewards. When we see a product we want, our brains get that quick hit of dopamine, making us feel good in the moment, and it doesn't stop there. The more we seek these quick rewards, the more our brains crave them, reinforcing the cycle. Advertising and the media know this. They've spent years perfecting the art of capturing our attention. Whether it's a catchy commercial, a provocative social media post, or a new product launch, every message is designed to appeal to our need for immediate satisfaction. The systems we've created feed into this. Our smartphones constantly ping us with notifications, creating a constant cycle of seeking out that next dopamine hit. We may feel good for a moment, but once the rush wears off, we're left wanting more, and it's in that wanting more, that constant craving for the next hit, where the problem lies. Epicurus would have recognized this behavior as a perfect example of false pleasure. The problem isn't the pursuit of happiness, it's that we're chasing it in all the wrong places. These quick rewards don't lead to lasting satisfaction, they lead to more wanting. We're never really content with the pleasure we just experienced because we're always focused on what's next. Epicurus taught that true happiness comes from focusing on simple, lasting pleasures that avoid excess and the pain that follows. But in today's world, it's almost impossible to avoid these distractions. They're everywhere, and they're designed to keep us hooked. This constant cycle of seeking instant gratification also feeds into the illusion of freedom. We're sold the idea that we are in control of our happiness, that we can choose our own path to satisfaction. Modern consumer culture tells us that the key to happiness is found in the next purchase, the next big thing. We're told that if we just buy this product, travel to this place, or experience this adventure, we'll feel complete. The message is clear. Happiness is something we can acquire, and all we have to do is spend, consume, and indulge. But in reality, this pursuit of consumption doesn't lead to the freedom it promises. Instead, it creates a cycle of dependence. We begin to rely on external things to bring us happiness, believing that we can choose our path to joy by simply acquiring more. The problem is, the happiness we get from these purchases is fleeting. Once the novelty wears off, we're left feeling empty again, and we go back to chasing something else. The freedom we thought we had is really just the illusion of choice. We're not in control of our happiness. We're being controlled by a system that profits from our constant desire for more. We buy into the idea that we can choose our happiness. But the truth is that we're trapped in a cycle that only makes us more dependent on external rewards. This cycle becomes especially dangerous when we start using fake happiness to escape discomfort. Many people turn to these quick fixes not just because they want to feel good, but because they want to avoid dealing with deeper issues. Life is difficult. We all face challenges, questions about the meaning of life, and moments of existential discomfort. It's not always easy to sit with these feelings, so instead of confronting them, we look for ways to distract ourselves. We turn to the quick pleasures that we know will give us a temporary escape. Social media, shopping, junk food, gambling. These things provide a momentary break from the discomfort, but they never solve the underlying problems. They just mask the pain, making us think we're feeling better when, in reality, we're just avoiding the deeper issues that need attention. Epicurus understood this well. He didn't believe that happiness came from avoiding life's challenges or distractions. He believed it came from facing them head-on and understanding our desires. True happiness, according to Epicurus, is found in wisdom, moderation, and reflection. It's not about seeking external rewards to fill the gaps, but about learning to find contentment in what we already have. This is where modern society often falls short. We're encouraged to keep running from discomfort, to fill every moment with something that promises a quick fix. And yet, all that really does is make us feel more disconnected from ourselves. It's easy to lose sight of what really matters when we're constantly distracted by things that don't offer real fulfillment. The addiction to instant gratification isn't just about wanting things. It's about avoiding the hard work of understanding what we truly need. It's easier to keep chasing after the next high than it is to confront the deeper questions about life and what makes us truly happy. But in the end, this pursuit only leaves us feeling more disconnected from the very things that could bring us lasting peace. Instead of finding freedom, we become slaves to our desires. Instead of finding meaning, we fill our lives with distractions that keep us from looking within. Epicurus would argue that the key to true happiness lies not in avoiding discomfort, but in understanding it. It's about realizing that the pursuit of instant pleasure will never bring lasting satisfaction. Happiness, according to him, isn't found in external rewards or fleeting pleasures. It's found in inner peace, in understanding our desires, and in living with wisdom and balance. Until we break free from the addiction to instant gratification, we'll keep chasing after things that promise happiness, but only leave us feeling emptier than before. In today's world, it's easy to get caught up in the rush for instant gratification. We're constantly surrounded by quick fixes, junk food, social media scrolls, distractions that promise to make us feel good right away but leave us empty in the long run. But what if we could apply the wisdom of someone like Epicurus to our modern lives, learning how to find true pleasure by making smarter choices? Let's consider how his philosophy can guide us toward a deeper sense of contentment. Epicurus believed that the path to true happiness wasn't through excess, but through simple, measured pleasures. For him, pleasure wasn't about indulging in whatever feels good in the moment. It was about avoiding pain and discomfort, seeking tranquility and peace in our lives. One area where we can immediately apply this idea is in the way we think about food. In our modern world, food is often treated as a quick fix, something to fill a need in the moment without much thought about the long-term effects. Junk food, fast food, snacks loaded with sugar and chemicals, all promise a quick boost of energy or satisfaction, but they come at a cost. Over time, they leave us feeling sluggish, unhealthy, and unsatisfied. The immediate gratification they offer fades quickly, and the physical discomfort they cause can make it harder to enjoy life in the long run. Epicurus would encourage us to reconsider what true nourishment really is. He'd suggest that instead of chasing quick fixes that might satisfy our cravings in the moment but leave us feeling worse later, we should focus on what will truly sustain us. Eating well isn't about indulgence. It's about balance and making choices that promote long-term well-being. It's not about denying yourself food that tastes good, but understanding that true pleasure comes from things that nurture both the body and the mind. By making healthier choices, eating fresh, wholesome meals, and taking the time to appreciate the process of preparing food, we begin to experience a deeper kind of satisfaction. The pleasure that comes from mindful eating isn't fleeting. It builds over time, helping us avoid the discomfort that comes from unhealthy habits. Another way we can apply Epicurus's philosophy today is by stepping away from the constant flood of information that comes with modern technology, particularly social media. We live in a world where it's easy to get caught in a cycle of endless scrolling. Social media is designed to capture our attention, offering us small hits of pleasure in the form of likes, comments, and new posts. But as satisfying as these things may seem in the moment, they don't contribute to lasting happiness. In fact, they can leave us feeling more isolated, more anxious, and less connected to the real world around us. Epicurus warned about the dangers of distractions, external things that promise happiness but only serve to keep us from truly understanding ourselves. Social media is one of the biggest distractions of our time. It tricks us into thinking that we're connected. But the truth is, these connections are often shallow, and they don't fulfill the deeper human need for genuine interaction. One practical way to bring Epicurus's wisdom into our modern lives is to take regular breaks from social media. A detox doesn't have to be drastic. It can be as simple as setting boundaries for how much time you spend online each day. It could mean designating specific hours or days when you don't check your phone or social accounts at all. This creates intentional space in your life to engage in real-world activities and to spend time reflecting on your needs and desires. By disconnecting from the digital world, you create room to connect with yourself and others in a meaningful way. You'll start to see that true satisfaction comes from spending time with people face-to-face, having deep, honest conversations, or simply enjoying your own company without the constant pressure of being on for an online audience. Finally, one of the most important ways we can apply Epicurus's philosophy today is by focusing on building meaningful relationships. Epicurus believed that friendship was one of the most important sources of happiness. He understood that having deep, authentic connections with others was crucial to living a fulfilled life. In our fast-paced world, it's easy to settle for superficial connections, interactions that are more about maintaining a social image than about real emotional bonding. Social media, in particular, can make it seem like we're surrounded by people, but often these connections are shallow. We might have hundreds of followers or friends, but how many of those relationships are truly meaningful? How many people do we have in our lives who we can rely on, share our struggles with, and who will support us through tough times? Epicurus would argue that true happiness comes not from having a large number of connections, but from nurturing a few deep relationships. These relationships don't have to be with many people, but they should be meaningful. It's about quality, not quantity. He would advise us to prioritize time with the people who matter most, to invest in those friendships, and to foster connections that bring us closer to understanding our own desires and needs. This could mean spending less time on online platforms and more time having meaningful, face-to-face conversations. It could mean being intentional about the people we surround ourselves with, choosing those who help us grow rather than those who drain our energy. In our modern world, it's easy to get swept up in the idea that more is better, that more food, more technology, more social interactions will bring us more happiness. But Epicurus showed us a different path. He taught that true happiness comes not from excess, but from simplicity, balance, and mindfulness. By making healthier choices, taking breaks from distractions, and prioritizing meaningful relationships, we can create lives that are filled with true pleasure, not fleeting satisfaction. Epicurus's wisdom is as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. In a world that constantly pushes us toward more, his philosophy offers a reminder that happiness isn't found in the next purchase, the next post, or the next meal, but in the simple, meaningful moments that bring us peace. Thank you for following us on this journey to self-awareness. If you like this kind of content, kindly like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more wisdom. Also turn on the notification bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Thank you.